The Florida Legislature is required to do only one thing, and that's pass a budget. This year, the House under Speaker Danny Perez is trying to cut off a lot of the emergency funds Governor Ron DeSantis has used during his time in office, arguing there needs to be greater oversight and accountability. During their conversation last week, Jim DeFeeti asked Senate President Ben Albritton about the Speaker's proposals, including cutting all funding for Hope Florida.
Let me just ask about Hope Florida. Do you believe that there is a place for Hope Florida in the budget for next year? Because the House right now doesn't seem to think there is one.
Yeah. Look, I have said from the very beginning that I believe the mission of Hope Florida is good. And, being able to connect people that are struggling to places where they can find the right resources and get life back on track makes perfect sense to me. I am wide open to the conversation about, how it's done, what type of, additional accountability and all those things. I'm wide open as president, and I believe the Senate would be too, on what those measures should be and the pros and cons of each. But, you ask about the mission of Hope Florida, and I would say that I think the idea and the mission of Hope Florida is a good one.
When it comes to emergency spending and the renewal of emergency declarations by the governor on immigration, do you think that's been appropriate? And more importantly, with those declarations comes his ability to spend hundreds of millions of dollars in often no bid contracts and in issues that we may or may not. I think we're right now dealing with an issue with the federal government where at least $600 million, possibly more, of money that was outlaid by the state for things like Alligator Alcatraz and other expenditures have not been reimbursed by the federal government, that money has passed due what should have been coming in. Does that concern you at all as to whether or not the state will be able to recoup those dollars from the federal government?
I would say concern would be the wrong word for me. I would say that, historically, and even today, I believe we're going to get reimbursed for those. I believe that the mission of, having a greater level of immigration, just call it accountability, is an important one. But as it relates to the federal government, sitting here today, do I wish we had already been reimbursed? Of course. But I do believe in the end that what they've said is true, that they're going to reimburse us for these things. And, at some point in time in the future, we're going to look back and say, wow, that was a pretty substantial blip on the screen. But, we've been reimbursed and things are continuing to move forward.
Do you think there has been enough accountability when it comes to how the governor and the executive branch has been spending that money?
There was no fanfare and, I didn't, take the media with me, but I will say this, and not trying to hide anything. I just felt like I wanted to go down and take a look at Alligator Alcatraz and see what the operation was about. It is certainly well done. I can give them credit for that. Very well thought out. And, the treatment of the folks that are in there appeared to me to be very good. And, that mission seems to be moving forward well. So from additional accountability and additional measures that will help, the government of the state of Florida to produce better government, I'm open to those conversations, every day. And I believe the Senate would be as a whole.
I did want to ask about Senate Bill 1134 by Senator Yarborough on DEI. There's been a number of folks who have raised some concerns about that bill, including the entire Miami Beach City Commission, which is made up of both Republicans and Democrats. They've raised concerns that the language in that bill is so broad and so ill-defined that, for instance, many issues, even if they were to support like a Jewish Heritage Month, that could be the focus of a litigation as a result of that bill. And I know that when that bill was in committee, the sponsors basically said, well, that'll be for the courts to decide. I see that as problematic because I'm not sure what the problem is that bill is designed to fix. I'm curious as to your thoughts as it relates to that bill.
Well, let me say this as a premise, that I do not believe that, forcing DEI into the system is going to produce the result that society as a whole needs to produce. And that is, we should, as a society, we should be, focused on loving our neighbor as ourselves. I know that sounds very, canny or coy, but that's how I live my life. So, there's a lot of things that are broken in society that if we just apply ourselves and our better angels, we would get better results. That being said, sure, there's a lot of concern in and around that bill. I've not heard that about the Miami City Commission. Appreciate you bringing that up to my attention. So just like any other bill, that bill has been heavily debated. It has been scrubbed, scrutinized. As it continues to move forward through the process, my goal is, like every time, I want the senators to do their work. I want their voice to matter. And, as it relates to their own communities and as it relates to their own perspectives, they're free to voice those opinions. Saw that today on several bills on the Senate floor. And quite frankly, it was glorious to watch. And that's what the Florida Senate, no, really, and that's what the Florida Senate should be about. We attack issues, we don't attack each other. And it was great to watch. We can agreeably disagree and we can have robust debate and conversation. That's what the entire government was set up to do. And we're doing our best to adhere to those.
Let me ask you one last question, because I do think it's a question that a lot of people, observers, sort of look at and like to play armchair psychiatrist sometimes, is the dynamic relationship between you and the speaker. The perception is that you and the speaker are not really in sync as you were when you both began, at the beginning of the previous session. And that there's some continuing tension, including last year, the failure by the House to take up a bill that was important for you, rural renaissance. How do you view your relationship currently with Speaker Danny Perez?
So it's been an interesting journey. And I mean that in the most beneficial terms. Danny Perez will be a friend of mine until God takes me off this earth. I will tell you, if I was broke down and my family was broke down in Miami, he'd be my first call. So, does that mean that we agree on all the policy and agree on certain appropriations and we agree on everything? No. There's a natural process that has shown itself, and that is the personality of the House and the personality of the Senate they're different. And does that mean that I don't respect the speaker and don't every single day look for ways to be able to work together with him and try to bridge some of the gap we have on policy ideas? No, it doesn't, right? I'm still interested in that, and I believe he is as well. So look, I think it's important for your viewers to understand that having disagreements inside the political process is completely natural. And it really is, it goes back to how you approach it. And, I am going to do everything in my power to make sure that I'm being, a good partner with the speaker, and we'll continue to find ways to be able to help Floridians and do a good job for Florida. He'll be a friend of mine until I'm not on this earth, and I'd take that to my grave.